Good morning. My name is Sherry Saylor, Chair of the American Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, and I'm also a proud member of the Arizona Farm Bureau and of the American Farm Bureau. And today's an extremely exciting day on so many levels, as our convention already has proven to be. However, this panel will provide insight into a sobering and serious epidemic that is affecting our rural communities in the United States. We're here today, of course, with our American President, Zippy Duvall, National Farmers Union President Roger Johnson, and Ann Hazlett, Assistant to the Secretary for Rural Development for USDA, to talk about the opioid crisis that is happening in farm country. We all know this isn't necessarily a happy topic, but it's a vital topic, and it's vital that we address it because it's so extremely important. And it is an epidemic, if you will. On a very personal level, I have a dear friend, a farmer friend of mine in Buckeye, Arizona, who sustained a back injury and was given opioids, and he eventually did not survive. He committed suicide because he could not get away from that addiction. We also had two young brothers in my town who lost their lives due to this addiction. So this is a very personal topic for me and for many of you, because I'm sure you know people in your town who have suffered because of this addiction. This is not a respecter of age or person. It can affect anyone, anywhere, even in our rural communities, places where we never thought we would deal with this kind of thing. But over the past few months, American Farm Bureau Federation and the National Farmers Union sponsored a survey that produced alarming results, and the USDA is making a concerted effort to fight this prevalent issue. It's evidently clear that the scourge of opioid addiction has hit farming and rural communities in many states very hard. That's why AFBF and NFU have united around a campaign called Farm Town Strong, to raise awareness, to provide a list of resources, and to start a conversation about rural opioid addiction. Today I'm going to moderate this panel of experts, and they're going to share what they learned from the survey and other things that they have learned in their life work. So I'm going to start with Roger and Zippy. The survey you conducted found that nearly 3 out of 4 farmers either knew someone, a friend or a family member, who has been affected by opioid epidemic, or they were affected themselves. What was the most surprising finding or findings in your opinions?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sherry, for moderating this. Zippy, thank you very much for being such an awesome partner in this effort. And Ann, thanks as well for USDA playing a major role in the information that we're about to share, and hopefully the effort that we're able to undertake across the country to bring attention to this issue and to bring some solutions to the issue. I think, to me, the most surprising statistic was the one that you mentioned. It is, the opioid addiction is a problem all over the country. But it is a larger problem in rural America than urban America. And surprisingly, in farm country, among farmers, farm workers, it is a larger problem than it is in rural America. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's sort of like we're the tip of the spear. For 3 out of 4 farmers, farm workers, folks who are directly involved in production agriculture, to know someone personally, to have someone in their family or to be personally impacted themselves, is really an astounding statistic. So to me, that was the big surprise with this survey, is the amount, the degree to which it impacts folks right in the middle of both of our organizations.
Thank you.
And I think the next area that kind of surprises us is the availability of it, and how so many people think it's so available to everyone. Maybe I live in a sheltered world, but I I feel like that I didn't think it would be that available, but to see the statistics say it was that available pretty much shocked me, Sherry.
Yeah, that's true. You know, both of your organizations sounded the alarm on this issue. What made you join together around this issue?
Well, Roger and I represent two great farm organizations, and we both have our policy books, and we respect each other for our policy and the way we develop those. But we are always, ever since I've been in town, Roger and I have become friends, and I challenged him, let's look for things that we can work together on. Let's look at things that we can work, highlight together to make something bigger happen. And Roger really, it was his idea and his organization that came to me and mentioned it to me, and I thought it was a great opportunity for us to help farmer to farmer, regardless of what organization you're part of or what commodity you grow, where you're from. This is about people and families' lives being destroyed, and the lack of knowledge that people have about what it's doing to our families, where do you get help, and then it's actually a sickness, not really, it's a disease, right. Not really something that's degrading of their character. You know, any one of us under the wrong conditions, under the right conditions, could fall a victim of this. So,
yeah, good point. You know, living in rural America, in my role, my side job, beside being a farmer, is a school counselor. And I've seen how opioid addiction is affecting families, as Zippy said. We know that those personal stories are important to help reduce the stigma around addiction. Can you share with us, in general terms, some of the stories any of you may have heard about the impact this crisis is having in your communities?
Yeah. So, Ann, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Anyone can start.
I have had an opportunity to see a wide range of families that have been impacted by this issue, everything from that family that has a child playing high school athletics that gets injured and receives medical treatment that probably was not appropriate. I've seen people in my home state of Indiana who've simply been in communities that don't have economic opportunity and are experiencing hope and despair. And then you can also find folks in communities that are doing quite well, but we as a country have become isolated, and people turn to other things when they feel pain rather than relationships in their own communities. And so it really has affected a wide range of families.
You know, about a year ago, not quite a year ago in there was a story that ran in the New York Times about a farmer and his family in Iowa, or in Ohio. Roger Weinmiller was his name. He's a member of Farmers Union, and I know him, and he's one of the leaders in the state. I think he's also a member of Farm Bureau, as is frequently the case with a lot of our membership. And his story was such a sad story to read about it in the New York Times. He had a son and then a daughter, 9 months apart, who both died of opioid overdoses. He was the one who found his daughter in the bathroom in his house. He had just gone out to get her a Coke at her request, came back and wasn't hearing anything, and had to break into the bathroom to find her dead. And the story goes on because they had 3 kids, and both of these were kids that were in their 30s, okay, and had been in and out of treatment for some long while. And his third child, who is at home with him farming, is also addicted. And the story was about him having to drive back and forth to take his 30-some-year-old son to treatment. And he's farming, you know. I mean, in the winter you can do that, but in the summer, in the middle of, sometimes 16, 18-hour days, going back and forth, this was a half-a-day ordeal for him to take his son for treatment, as is frequently the case in rural America. You don't have ready access to these facilities, and it was just such a heartbreaking story. But there are, I mean, obviously, there are so many of those kinds of stories around, as you would imagine, or we wouldn't have this problem as large as it is today.
And Sherry, I think too, there's a situation in Georgia where I knew of a farm family. Son hurt his knee and had it operated on, and as taking medicine for that pain, he was addicted. And I discovered that because the father approached me and says, my son's in the Christian men's home in your county, and my church is always a big supporter of that Christian men's home that have problems, whether it be alcohol or drugs or opioids or whatever it might be. And the thing that we need to understand, and what's so important about Farm Town Strong, is that if we can get people to open up, and if we can get people to talk about it and get the awareness of it, then we can get them some help. This young man didn't die. This young man, through very supportive parents and a great program at this Christian home in support of religious, faith-based groups around him, was able to put this young man back on the farm, marry, have children, and being very productive. So the point we need to take away from here is, you know, even though 91 people die every day in the United States because of this, if we as Americans, rural America, come together and try to get people to feel good, understand that they shouldn't be ashamed of it, they should ask for help, or we should be asking them to let us help them and find some help for them so that we can help these people rehabilitate their lives and put them back on a productive route.
Great point. There is hope. You know, the strength of our rural communities could help, as you said, Zippy, overcome this challenge. And I think, I'm going to ask you this question. I think you've answered it sort of, but is that one of the reasons you chose a web address of farmtownstrong.org? And then also, in what ways can our communities help?
Yeah. Well, that is the reason that the Farm Town Strong web address was chosen, because it was, as Zippy just mentioned, it was to point out that, you know, if there's anything that the farming community, the ranching community, production agriculture is known for, it's when somebody is hurt, the whole community turns out to help them. And this issue needs to be viewed as someone is hurt, not something that folks need to be ashamed of. And to the degree that we can increase the delivery of that message, then I think the likelihood is quite high that farmers, folks in rural America, are going to come together and rally around these folks. I mean, if there is a bright side to this dark cloud, it is that when times are really tough in agriculture, the community comes together to help support them. And it's that sort of behavior that we want to really encourage around this issue.
Thank you. I'm going to put these two questions together, but I think they're important questions. Why do you think so many people are becoming addicted, and do we have the facilities in rural America that we need to address the problem? I don't know, who wants to take that?
I can take that.
Okay, I thought so.
Thinking about rural America, I think you have some unique dynamics that certainly, while this issue has impacted the entire country, we see a particularly strong impact on rural communities. You have in rural America, we still have a lot of jobs that are labor intensive, long hours, and when someone is hurt, they often need something to continue to be able to work. In rural America, we have isolation, where people are geographically isolated, and more with the busyness of life, maybe those relationships that were one time the base of the community are not as strong as they were. We also have, if activity in the area has picked up, we have limited law enforcement resources to help crack down on illicit drugs. And lastly, I think when people do fall into the need for assistance, we have a lack of mental and behavioral health and treatment facilities, resources to help them. At USDA, we have a number of programs that are well suited to help communities build up that infrastructure. We have a community facilities program. We have a distance learning and telemedicine program that will help people get access to telemedicine equipment that can deliver some of those services. And so certainly that is just one piece of the larger puzzle, but we do have those resources at rural development.
That's great. Yeah, and I think you've answered this, but the next question was, what about Washington, D.C.? Because we know that Secretary Perdue has recently signed a USDA rural development initiative and the lead role in this matter. And I guess the question is, how can we as organizations help in this area?
Well, Secretary Perdue, under his leadership, we at Rural Development at USDA are focused on rural prosperity, and we see this issue, obviously, this is a health issue, but it's a broader issue, one of rural prosperity. And so the partners that we have here at the table, Farm Bureau and Farmers Union, there's a number of initiatives that we look forward to working hand in hand with them on to make a difference in this and just to make rural communities those places of promise for generations to come.
You know, one of the other interesting statistics that came out of the survey, which juxtaposed against the one that we mentioned earlier, that it's like 3/4 of all farmers have been directly impacted in one fashion or another by this crisis, is that those same folks believe that this is a problem that's larger in urban America than rural America. It's only like 1/3 of the rural population that is of the view that this is a problem that is larger in rural America than urban America. So I point that out because there is this impression, and I spend most of my life on the farm. I kind of understand how this impression is created, but there's this impression that somehow it's the cities that are worse off, that this is an urban problem. We, in agriculture, we often tend to think that way. In fact, in my generation, that is really where the drug problems were. When I was a kid, it was the center cities that were where the real problem was. And today, the center city problems have sort of moved into rural America. And so the point here is, let's be sure that we get this information out to folks so they understand, in fact, this is a rural America problem. The first step to solving any problem is to understanding it. And I'm, as we've said before, I'm just convinced that as folks better understand the problem, as we can bring communities together to surround this problem, that this whole farm town strong kind of concept is something that's gonna bear some fruit, and that's the positive message here.
And Sheriff, if you could just think about town strong.
Farm strong.
Farm strong. Farm strong town.
Yes, .org.
I'm sorry, my tongue
right.
was twisted. If you think about that scenario, whether it's in the American Farm Bureau and our state farm bureaus, we have 2,700 counties that have farm bureaus there with farmers that own boards of directors. And what if each one of them boards empowered themselves as being the loving neighbors that we would if someone just got hurt by a cow and we went and done their work for them? This is no different. They're hurting and they're in need. And if our counties had the resources or had the ability to communicate where people could get help, maybe put 2 or 3 farmers together to confront somebody and try to offer to help them. Look what a difference we could make in their life. And if we just save one farmer's life or one farmer's family from being destroyed by this, it's well worth the effort they're putting into it.
Very good point. I know I live 30 miles west of Phoenix, and I talk to many people who move out to my community to get away from the big city. And, of course, we've had 3 people die because of this in my little town this past year. So I think the point's well made, and I also believe that that's a great point as well, that we need to surround these people and take the shame out, come forward, get them the help they need. That's what we do in farming and ranching. We're a family. We help each other.
And in fact, Zippy, to your point, more than likely, the person who is addicted got injured by a cow to begin with, you know, or has had some farm accident because I don't think it came out of this survey, but some other literature I've read about this problem suggests that 80% of those who are addicted to opioids started with legal prescription medication for pain. So it likely started from that cow, Zippy, and so let's treat it the same way.
That's exactly right. Ann, I know you've alluded to this, but maybe reiterate it again, but how is USDA working to address this crisis? And from USDA's perspective, how has this crisis affected rural communities?
Well, thanks for that question. Without a doubt, there has been an impact on rural America when we look at this issue. You know, I think it's important. Certainly, we've talked some today about families, and when we think about the impact on families, this has a tremendous impact on our extended families. We see thousands and thousands of children being raised by that second generation of a grandparent or an extended family member. We think about the stress then on our foster care system. In some states, foster care loads are up 50%, and that is due in large part to one or both parents struggling with addiction issues. Beyond our families, we think about communities and the challenges that this causes, the burdens this puts on local elected officials, whether it's needing more resources for emergency response, law enforcement, judicial needs. We have lost productivity in our economy, increased healthcare demands, and we think about all this in the context of rural, where so many officials are already dealing with shoestring budgets. These aren't places that have a lot of extra dollars to begin with, let alone when we add in addiction on top of that. And then lastly, we have the direct costs that we see in our businesses and the impact that that will have on agriculture. Last week, I had an important conversation with a major egg producer in my home state, and he told me that they've had a lot of addiction challenges in their workforce in recent months, and that for each employee that they are walking through this journey with, it's around $9,000 per employee. Well, that's $9,000 that we're not seeing then invested in more capital investment in that community or maybe a business expansion, and those are opportunities then that trace back directly to the producers that these two organizations represent. So those costs are very, very real. At USDA, we really see this, again, not just as a healthcare issue, but one of rural prosperity. We do have a number of tools that I mentioned, our community facilities program, as well as a telemedicine program. Later today, Secretary Perdue will be talking about an agriculture and rural prosperity task force that he's been chairing. We have a report that will be released in the very near future, and certainly quality of life was a point of discussion in that prosperity task force, and I led the quality of life work group, a lot of discussion there about this topic. In addition, we have Congress looking at a new farm bill, and we have been actively engaged in the rural development title discussions. There, we have a number of programs that we think could be improved to better address this issue.
That's great. And I know that, as President Duvall said, we have 2,800 counties that need to jump in and get involved in that. And is there anything specific that we can do now in our counties to address this epidemic?
I think that's a great question. You know, from my own experiences working on this issue, both at USDA and in ministry, I believe very strongly that the solutions to this challenge really lie at that local level.
Right.
So with that foundation, I guess I'd offer two thoughts in that regard. First, you know, I would encourage everybody to get engaged now, build that local team that can come in. You know your community, you know the assets that are there, you know the people that need to be pulled together, whether it's a business leader or the Rotary or a church that's been very active in this issue. You can identify what those needs are, decide what you want to tackle, and jump in. We've got some great examples here, right here at Farm Bureau. I got to visit with Ohio Farm Bureau leaders yesterday who've been very engaged in this matter, using their county fair and community rallies to begin to raise awareness. The second point that I would make in this is that I think very strongly that if there is a silver bullet in this, it's relationships. Relationships really matter on this issue. I had a recent experience that I'll share just a little bit about today. In my home state of Indiana, there's a town of Austin that is in south central Indiana. It's about 4,000 people, has been very hard hit by this issue. And there's a woman there named Becky, and Becky began serving a weekly dinner. And I had an opportunity to meet Becky a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her, boy, how did you start this? because this event now includes almost 200 people every Thursday evening for dinner. And she said she just noticed in her town that there was a group of people who were isolated and needed help. And so they started very simple. She laughed and told me she doesn't even really like to cook, but they really got this off the ground. It's called Food for Our Souls, and there's over 200 people that are coming that would otherwise be living in isolation. And when they come, they're not just getting a meal, they're getting encouragement, they're getting that healthy relationship that is so important to keeping people focused on that vision for not only prosperity for themselves and their families, but for their future. And that's what this issue is really about. It's about a lack of hope and despair, and that's something that we all can contribute through relationship to doing something about. And that's what I get excited about in working in this.
Go ahead.
And Sherry, I'd like to encourage everyone that's listening. I mean, we got a lot of county farm bureaus here, and just think if our county farm bureaus took this up as a mission for them to save their own and help. And let's not forget too, when we talk about farm families, we're really talking about the farm families that help us on our farm, that are hired by us, and a lot of those people don't have the resources, or they don't have the ability to go out and find help, and we have just as big a responsibility to them morally, but also from a liability standpoint, for our farms. So this morning at a very early time when I couldn't sleep, I went to the Farmtown Strong webpage. It's a great website, and a lot of our workers are Latino. A lot of the information there can be gotten in Spanish, and whoever put that together has done an outstanding job. I thought it was very well done.
Do you have any final comments as well, Roger, before we close
Well,
up?
I grew up in agriculture, as I said earlier, and I grew up going to local farmers union meetings that happened every month. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here is, as the years have gone by, farmers have gotten larger and larger. The distances between farms has gotten greater. The time for us just getting together, just to get together, is significantly reduced. And we need to bring some of that back. I think to the point that both Ann and Zippy have made about this, as we get these folks just sitting down and talking and communicating and understanding what's going on in one another's lives, that is going to be an important part of this solution. So some of this is, let's go back to kind of culturally, socially, some of the things that we know. And we know how to do this. We just need to go back and do it.
Yeah, that's great.
And
go
finally,
ahead.
I'd like to say thank you to Secretary Perdue and Ann for carrying the banner to help us find solutions for this critical problem. To have a secretary that's concerned about the individual people that are out on the farm is just heartwarming, and I know you feel that for working for him. And then, of course, Roger, thank you so much. I'm sure this is just one of many areas that we can work together to make something very positive happen in our farmland.
Thank you, Zippy, and I would echo that. I mean, one of the real pleasures that I've had in this job is getting to know folks. Listen, I came from North Dakota out to Washington, D.C. There's not very much that those two places have in common, but there's a little bit. And Zippy, having a chance to get to know you and be a friend of yours, and having our organizations work together on these issues that are so important has been a joy. It's the kind of stuff that we need to do more of. And frankly, agriculture has generally been pretty good about that stuff.
Right,
Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that folks think or hear or sometimes even read about is where we might be on different sides on policy issues, and of course we are. But on the big things, we generally are pretty much in lockstep, and
That's right.
It's good to have a good partner. Thank you.
That's true, and I think Ann and all of you have mentioned the relationship. God built us for relationship. I do believe that, and we need to. We've prided ourselves in the Farm Bureau on community, and we have community within our Farm Bureau. We just need to remember to go back to those basics and look out for each other. And I also want to thank you all for your insights, for your guidance that you've given us today. I hope everybody will go on the website and be looking for the things in your community that you can do. I know in my little community we have Way Out West Drug Coalition. I'm a member of it. We have farm people in it, city people. We're trying to educate our youth, educate everybody in our community about this particular issue, which is, as we have all said, has filtered out into the rural community. We need to continue fighting this addiction, especially, I think, in the rural community. And I want to publicly thank all of you, Roger, Ann, and Zippy, for taking time. I know this is a busy morning. A lot of things, as you said, are on our mind today. But this is huge, and we appreciate the time that you've given to us. And as this panel concludes, I want to challenge each Farm Bureau member who's here and across our great land to contribute to the efforts of fighting this awful epidemic. I know in my committee, we're going to take that step, and we're going to make that part of our program of work this year. And I'm sure everybody in Farm Bureau will follow suit. So I thank you. Unless there's anything else, we'll thank you for being here. And we know we're going to have an amazing, historic day in American Farm Bureau today. So thank you very much for coming. Let's give these folks a hand.
Thank you.